For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. The situation in Ukraine doesn't seem to improve at all. In fact, if anything, the assault by Russia is intensifying, and the resistance put up by the Ukrainians is also showing no signs of crumbling, at least in some places. How does it pan out? And so far, how has the military campaign panned out in terms of what Russia wanted to achieve? Is the subject of this evening's gist. So my guest this evening for the gist is Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, former DG of Assam Rifles, but that was his last appointment. But before that, he has done multiple tenures and multiple appointments in counterinsurgency situations. He has been a defense attaché in Nepal and very intense watcher of international relations as well as strategic affairs. Welcome to this program, General Chauhan. First up, let me ask you, did you anticipate the Russians to do what they did, the way they planned this assault, the way they had their objective in mind? What's your sense? Because you have also commanded one corps and perhaps exercised with them when you're commanding one corps in Mathura, the strike corps. What's your sense in this?
Good afternoon, Nitin. Yes, they had carried out, it's a conventional operation. And in conventional operation, you can actually tell how they plan to carry out and how they plan to go inside Ukraine by the manner by which they had mobilized. As you are aware, Nitin, they have almost 190,000 troops along the Ukraine border out of a total strength of 880,000, which the Russian army and the armed forces have. They had mobilized about 190 to 200,000 men and placed them. Now, how do they place them, Nitin? If you look at the north, they had about 60 to 70, that is one corps in the area of Belarus, which is north of Kiev. They similarly had another corps east of Kiev.
Right.
And they had another corps south of Kiev, that is south of Ukraine itself, but in the general area of Donetsk and Luhansk. That's the manner in which they had planned their mobilization. And that's, once you see the mobilization, you are aware that the troops would also go in the same manner. So it's basically mathematical, or it's a part of our military learning that we would be able to operate for that. Now, they had three main aims, Nitin. One was the Crimean, since they had Crimea with them, they wanted to close or seal the area between the Sea of Azov. That means between where they were in Donetsk and where they were in Luhansk, they wanted to seal that part. So one pincer went to close this particular area, which has been succeeded completely. There was absolutely no Ukrainian force which opposed them sealing this area of the Sea of Azov. So they've cut out Ukraine totally from the south. The Ukraine no longer has any access to the Sea of Azov.
Exactly.
So they've actually closed up Crimea, they've closed up Odessa, and they've closed up Luhansk. The Odessa port is with them. There was a little bit of problem with Odessa port, but they have more or less closed up. Now you go further north and east of Kiev. There is the second largest city in Ukraine called Kharkiv.
Exactly.
So one pincer was moving towards Kharkiv.
Yes.
And another pincer from the area of Belarus coming northeast was to move towards Kiev. So that's the way the Russians had planned this campaign against Ukraine.
So tell me, in principles of war, there is always something called the center of gravity, the center of command and control. So Kiev, of course, is the obvious target. But why Kharkiv? Is there a plan that the Russians have in mind that areas east of the Dnieper River should be totally under their control? Is that what they plan? If you see their deployments going forward, I think that's what they want to achieve.
Absolutely. I was also, wondering when they were planning the three prongs as to why they plan these prongs and why is the Dnieper River important to them. If Putin or the Russians are to take the area west of the Dnieper River, or rather east of the Dnieper River,
East of Dnieper River, yeah.
that is the majority of the places where they have a Russian population.
Exactly.
That also gives them a fair amount of buffer. It gives them a fair amount of gap, since you are aware that Ukraine is the sixth largest country in the world. So there's a lot of space there. There's a lot of space there.
Right.
So if he can push the balance of Ukraine west of the Dnieper River without great loss, I think Putin would have achieved what he wanted to achieve. Now you were asking about the center of gravity of this.
Yes.
Normally in military campaigns, the central thrust is the center of gravity. But here, as you see, Nitin, the three thrusts are complementary, but do not support each other because there's a largest gap between all.
Yeah.
But because there is very little opposition to them, they have been able to succeed quite well. Now, why didn't they succeed between the 24th to 28th? And why have they now intensified the operations from the 1st to the 3rd? Those are probably the next questions that you might be wanting to ask.
No,
Right?
so certainly those two questions, but also by capturing the area between the river and the border, Ukraine-Russia border, perhaps Putin has also pushed the buffer zone and created a largest buffer zone should the NATO forces or the American forces try to come in there, which is unlikely at the moment. But at least he's pushed the boundaries westwards. Which gives him a breathing space, I suppose, which was already playing on his mind for so many years now. Is that what first I wanted to ask, and then the other two questions which I've already anticipated?
See, Nitin, it's actually surprising as to why Ukraine would like to poke Russia in the eye. I'm very surprised by this particular thing. I mean, surely any leadership in any country would tell you what are the red lines of a larger and more powerful country, which is south of you.
Right.
From 1999, Nitin, the Russians have been telling NATO and the world, the Western world, and NATO agreed at that time, the Americans agreed, that they would not push NATO beyond certain lines beyond 1999. But yet NATO kept pushing. From Hungary, it came down to Poland. From Poland, it came down to the Baltic Republic.
Yes.
And this reaction only happened now. And it
after
happened
30 years,
after
20 years.
30 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the second thing is, surely Zelensky was aware when they did the revolution in 2015 and pushed out the pro-Russian leader, that this would create a problem for him.
Exactly.
Now, in the area in South Ukraine, which is adjoining Russia, they have almost 20% population in Donetsk, 20 to 30% population in Donetsk.
Right.
20% to 30% population in Luhansk.
Yes.
This population had been complaining about white Ukraine or Eastern Ukraine pushing their agenda on the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Ukraine, as you are aware, Nitin, has been a part of Russia for almost their entire life.
Yeah.
It's only in the last 30 years that they have been independent of Russia. Otherwise, they've been a part of Russia. So they are fully in sync with Russia. And there is a large population which are Russian, which was settled there by the Russians when it was a part of the USSR. And it was a very important part of the USSR.
Exactly.
So by taking this, Putin was clear that there would be no reaction from the West.
Right.
Just
No,
as he had
that's
done in
true.
Crimea, just as he had done in Georgia. He was clear that no one would react. So
Exactly. So
why did he react going up north? Was because he's now clear that Zelensky is not going to listen to him.
yes,
So
right.
he has to create a new government. He has to
Yeah.
have a regime change. And that's
Correct.
the regime change that he's looking at. That's the reason why he's going to Kyiv. That's the reason why he's taken Kharkiv, which is the second largest city in Ukraine.
City.
And that's
Exactly.
the reason why he's going to push them beyond the Dnieper River.
Yeah.
These are the three issues.
That's true. Now, in this entire military campaign, there was one initial phase where it seemed that the advance reconnaissance columns and the reconnaissance teams were outrunning the logistics support, and they seemed isolated for a while. Do you think that was just pure sheer enthusiasm on part of the advance columns, or that something was not rehearsed really? What went wrong according to whatever images or whatever reports that we have got from there, because that seemed a little odd for a army of that size and a Russian army basically.
See, Nitin, normally how we plan, and even in the strike co, how we plan, is that the first thrust is, as you said, a reconnaissance. So this was
Exactly.
meant to be a reconnaissance.
Yeah.
Why did they outstrip their logistics? Is obviously bad planning.
Hmm.
But that has been rectified by Russia now. And post the 1st of March, you would have noticed a much greater weight of operations and much greater weight of forces that have entered Ukraine and are now leading the advance towards Kiev and Kharkiv.
Yeah, exactly. And the armored thrust, of course, is very visible. Of course, they're also using standoff weapons there. And paratroopers have also come into the equation, is what one hears now, according to some
Wherever the
reports.
link up was possible,
Yeah,
Chernobyl, and wherever they wanted the airports, and where the link up was in less than 6 to 8 hours, they used the
right.
paratroops to sort of speed up the operations. But
And
as these
exactly.
armored columns, Nitin, now
Yeah,
reach Kiev and Kharkiv, you
yes.
will you will realize that the Russians will not go inside the cities.
They'll just surround
Their
them and
idea,
see,
yeah,
put a
their
siege.
idea is in military parlance, isolate Kiev.
Right.
After that, invest Kiev. That means they
Hmm.
will prevent any kind of forces to come inside Kiev.
Yeah.
And once they do that, Nitin,
Hmm.
Kiev will fall like a ripe fruit just falls because there will be nothing that can come in.
Exactly.
So,
No
and the other thing,
reinforcements.
yeah, and there is no reinforcement. And
Hmm.
within Kiev, if you've noticed, and a lot of images that are coming, the Russians are going to a great extent, despite the propaganda that is there, of preventing civilian casualties.
Yes. Of course, they want to
I,
preserve. They want to have the infrastructure intact. They don't want to target the people. I think he'll only target the leadership, perhaps,
correct.
going forward into in Kiev.
In 2015, Putin published an essay on Ukraine in which he specified that the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia are one people.
Right.
If you go back 700 years ago, or maybe 1,000 years ago, uh, Kiev was the trading post where this Viking tribe of Rus actually came first. So
Hmm.
Kiev is the capital of what became Russia. And then that
The
capital moved southward, Moscow,
correct.
so that they could control the balance of their powerful empire that they had created. So Kiev
The Tsarist
and
Empire, which was
Russians,
there.
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
absolutely. So
Hmm.
the Kiev
Hmm.
are a part of Russia. They are Eastern Slavs.
That's
So
true.
yeah, so I don't expect that the Russian army would target the people unless they start targeting them.
Of course. I think many of them have fled also. 800,000 Ukrainians
Yes,
have
yes,
fled
yes, yes.
their country. They've crossed the borders into other countries around them. But two more questions. One, of course, is the softening up of the popular opinion. Also, I mean, you are a acknowledged authority on the information war or disinformation war. We have spoken about it a number of times offline. In this case, you think the Russians actually softened up opinion? They built up the perception that it is coming, and yet the West failed to see the assault or the operation that was launched by Russia.
See, there are two opinions here that need to be controlled. One is the world's opinion. That means who controls the airwaves in the world. And second is the opinion within Ukraine.
Right.
Outside Ukraine, the Western world has a huge advantage because they control all the means of media, all the media means. So they control the flow of information to the rest of the world. And therefore, we will find a one-sided, biased view of what is happening inside Ukraine, unknown to the Ukrainians or to the Russians, since they are excluded from that. And that could be very well a part of the disinformation situation that they're doing.
Yes.
Especially in Europe and the Western world.
Absolutely.
The second opinion that needs to be reshaped is the opinion of the Ukrainians themselves.
Correct.
I was just reading somewhere, Nitin, that the border towns, which Russians have already taken, and as they move from Kharkiv to Kiev, the opinions of the Ukrainians living there, since they were living in great fear and the Russians have not really hit them, that is likely to be moving towards the Russians, or at least to an acceptance of the Russian suzerainty over these places.
Absolutely.
So that is the opinion of those populations which I think the Russian army and Russia will target and try and get that part of the population with them.
Subsumed in their own larger framework.
But the rest of the world and the larger United Nations, it will be very difficult for Russia to change because there's nothing really coming out from there.
Yeah, but I think Putin has decided that's a risk worth taking. One final question, General Chauhan. The questions have been raised about no involvement of the Russian Air Force in this campaign so far. What's the reason, you think? And I think, in my view at least, it's a prudent decision. But you may want to elaborate on what you think.
Nitin, you're right. It did boggle me in the beginning. But, Russians were so confident of the fact that they had a superior air situation over Ukraine, and that the NATO and the rest of the world would not dare to come inside the area. They did not want to risk their air force.
Right.
Firstly, because probably they were told that the ground forces could do it, and that the Ukrainian Air Force, despite the grey ghost, or whether it's a true story or not, whether the grey ghost succeeded or not. But now, if you notice, after the 1st of March, the Russian Air Force has started flying. Right. There's a favorable air situation. They're also using their larger drones in this area.
Exactly.
And as a result, the information that the Western world or the rest of the world was getting about what's happening inside Ukraine has largely reduced to probably WhatsApp or information coming from individual people's cameras and mobile phones.
Right.
So other than that, they're not clear of how the situation is emerging there. And therefore, they're focusing on the Russian missiles or the kind of, the destruction of certain buildings, especially government buildings, are concerned.
Correct. Yeah. So one final thought from you. If you were the Russian general, would you be satisfied with the progress of the operations, or you would have some things improved if this had to be repeated somewhere else? At the moment, so far.
Nitin, having actually seen the Russian general operate with me, there are two things I noticed that they do. One is they use overwhelming force, Nitin. They do not hesitate in the use of artillery and missiles, and they use very large and very overwhelming force of artillery. I have noticed that in this particular operation, they are not using that, mainly
Right.
because of the kind of destruction that they might do to Ukraine. So probably they have been told at the highest level that reduce the destruction, because what they did from the 24th to 28th was not really the way Russia fights war.
Yeah, it baffled a lot of people.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
It
from the
baffled.
first onwards, you would notice a larger use of standoff weapons, a larger use of them targeting certain governmental buildings, and probably a larger number of people dying.
Yes. That's
Because
true.
it's not that the Ukrainian resistance was great, it's just that they realized that maybe they were being slowed down. But
Exactly.
the issue about being slowed down, Nitin, because it's being talked about so much that maybe they didn't do so well, I would go to the other point that in the first 4 days, and it's just 4 days, 24th to
Yes.
28th, just 4 days, it's
Yeah.
too short for any nation to think that they can do any kind of regime change.
Exactly.
So
No, but
surely
I
being
think,
realistic, and they are
yeah,
realistic people.
yeah, they are. And also, if you look at the distance that they have traveled, almost 200, 250 kilometers
Absolutely.
in those 4 5 days, I think it's great progress, despite
Yes.
the the gaps, or despite some setbacks here and there. So overall, I think the Russians are on track track to achieve their objective, and therefore we have to look ahead and see how they now do a regime change, perhaps, or then take control of Kiev, as you said, isolate Kiev, and then wait for it to fall. That would be in the future. But General
Yeah.
Chauhan, thank you very much for your time and your
Just a
insights.
postscript, Nitin, you might
Sure.
consider putting this in,
Right.
is when we saw the Armenia-Azerbaijan war, there was a overwhelming support for the unarmed drones that
Drones.
were being used by Azerbaijan,
Right.
right? Where are the drones now? That
The
means
Russians have learned their lessons.
the
Yeah.
conventional war, the tanks whom we had already consigned to dust after seeing that thing, and that warfare has changed, has not
Right.
changed that much.
I don't think
Larger
so. Yes.
columns are still going, larger
Oh,
mechanized
yes.
columns are going, combined arms warfare columns are being maintained. So, maybe people were too quick to feel that, the warfare had all returned back to a mechanized, to a stage at which it would all be artificial intelligence.
No,
So
yeah, you're right.
that
Absolutely. It's a lesson for India too, that you cannot give up on planning
absolutely,
for conventional wars. So
absolutely,
that's a great thought to end this
yeah,
conversation on. And again, thanks very much, General Chauhan, for your time and your
pleasure,
insights. Great
pleasure,
learning here. And
pleasure.
going ahead, when an occasion arises, we'll have one more or two more occasions to talk about this.
Always a pleasure, Nitin, to talk to you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Viewers, do keep watching StratNews Global. You know where to reach us. Give us feedback. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, keep sending comments. And we will bring you more such discussions, more such insights from very knowledgeable people in their own field of expertise. For the time being, it's goodbye.